This is Damon Fordham, author and historian, as well as adjunct professor of history at Charleston Southern University and the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina. And tonight I'm telling you about the lesser known heroes of the Tulsa Massacre, also known as the Black Wall Street case. Now, those of you who've heard about this have probably seen some things on Facebook or Twitter or YouTube about a well-to-do black section of Tulsa, Oklahoma that was destroyed by white mobs envious of the success of the African Americans. And the stories tend to end there. You don't hear anything about what happened in between, before, after, or in between, and how a lot of these individuals in Tulsa didn't just roll over and die. A lot of them actually worked to save their community. And that's the story that I'm telling you tonight. You see, the story goes back. Tulsa, Oklahoma, back in 1921, was a pretty wealthy city largely because of oil. And this description is best given by a lady by the name of Mary F. Jones Parrish, who wrote this book, Events of the Tulsa Disaster in 1923. She was a survivor of the massacre and collected stories of people who also survived, as well as telling of her own experiences. This is what she has to say about Tulsa before the riot. I came from Rochester, New York in 1918 to visit a brother who lived in Tulsa. In Rochester, our people were of a limited number, and the sole business engaged was restaurants, hotels, rooming houses, barbershops, and beauty parlors. During my few months' stay in Tulsa, my eyes feasted on the progressive sights they beheld among our group. Every face seemed to wear a happy smile. She went on to add that I then decided to locate in Tulsa. I had heard of the town since girlhood and of the many opportunities here to make money. But I came not to Tulsa as many came, lured by the dream of making money and bettering myself in the financial world, but because of the wonderful cooperation I observed among our people, and especially the harmony and spirit and action that existed between the businessmen and women. Upon leaving the Frisco station going north to Arthur Street, one could see nothing but Negro business places. Going east on Archer Street for 2 or more blocks, there you would behold Greenwood Avenue, the Negro Wall Street. And that's where the term Black Wall Street comes from. Now, however, there was trouble in paradise. Oklahoma was a segregated state. And Scott Ellsworth also wrote about the story in his book, Death in the Promised Land, the Tulsa Race Riot of 1921. He wrote this back in 1982. And he mentions that there was, about 2 years prior to this, there was a lynching of a young white man named Roy Belton. And that caused great unease in the black community because it was felt that if this young white man could be lynched, what could happen to them? They soon found out. On May the 31st, 1921, there was a young black shoeshine man by the name of Dick Rowland, who entered the Drexler building in Tulsa so he could take the elevator up to the bathroom and use it. And he was on the elevator with a white girl named Sarah Page. And when they got to one of the floors, the elevator opened, Sarah Page screamed, and Dick Rowland ran out. To this day, it's not sure whether he stepped on her foot or whether they were in an altercation or he tried to molest her, but the latter was the story that was told. So Dick Rowland was arrested and put in the Tulsa jail, and the sheriff kept an eye on him. But one of the local papers put out a horrible story of lynching to be held tonight, and that agitated many in the white community to go out to the jail with guns and pistols to lynch Dick Rowland. Now here's the part of the story you almost never hear. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the burning by Tim Madigan about the Tulsa Massacre. And the gentleman that you see here is the picture of courage. This is Obie Mann. Obie Mann was a Black World War I veteran in Tulsa who led a posse of 50 African-American World War I veterans armed with rifles to the Tulsa jail to protect Dick Rowland from being lynched. Well, now, the white mob was none too happy to see these guys there, put it mildly. And one of them walked up to Obie Mann with a rifle and said, "What are you going to do with that gun?" And Obie Mann looked him dead in the eye and held up his rifle and said, "I'm going to use it." And the battle was on. Gunshots were fired, and the blacks and whites started shooting at each other. But the blacks were outnumbered, and they retreated into the African American community with the whites in hot pursuit. Well, not only was there Obie Man, however, there was also Horace Pegleg Taylor, who was a veteran of World War I who lost a portion of his leg and walked around with a peg leg. But according to J. Mason Brewer's book, American Negro Folklore, published in 1968, he interviewed a Tulsa survivor named Curly Hackman, and this is what he had to say about Pegleg Taylor. Horace Pegleg Taylor was a Negro veteran of World War I, and he lived on First Street, 5 blocks from where the whites gathered to go into the Negro section and seize the Negro again. Pegleg had been stealing things from Dick Barton's, a general store that had more ammunition than any other store in town. He slipped in the store and carried away ammunition all day Sunday until 10 o'clock Monday morning, when the white store operators were planning to seize the Negro again. Pegleg had enough ammunition to hold the whites off while other Negroes looted the store. Moving up the hill 6 blocks from First Street going north, the Negroes made their stand. The whites burned houses, churches, and schools to get the Negroes out in the open, but the Negroes opened fire from the hill with bullets. This is the part of the story that you don't often hear. These people fought back. Now, however, the mob went crazy once they were in Tulsa. And these were some pretty horrifying scenes that you see here of the community being burned and destroyed. And at one point, they rounded up African Americans and placed them in the convention hall in a semi-imprisonment type of state on the guise of protecting them. One of the survivors, now, Mary Jones Parrish also interviewed many of the survivors I mentioned earlier, and there's some really interesting accounts of their experiences. So, for example, this is from J.P. Hughes. Tulsa, Oklahoma, June 23, 1921. On the night of the riot, I was living at 623 Hill Street. My wife was sick and had been confined only 3 days. She was under the care of Dr. Jackson, who was to have called the next morning at 8 o'clock. I heard the firing all night. In the early morning, the whites began firing on my house, so I had to try and find a place of safety to take my wife. When I returned, my children had taken her to a neighbor's home. By that time, they were looting and burning my home. We had 2 trunks, which they took into the street and bust open, took what they wanted, and set fire to the rest. The rest of my family with my wife made it to the soldiers for protection, and she was so sick that she fainted. They had me surrounded, so I got a water barrel, rolled it into an orchard of peach trees, and hid into it until this all passed over. I lost about $2,500 worth of property. And another survivor of all of this, by the name of A.J. Newman, talked about how he was taken over to how they were taken to Convention Hall during the burning. Said, I was marched to the top of the Brickyard Hill, and I was called all kind of names by boys from 10 years to men of 60. Then I was loaded in a truck and carried to the corner of Boulder and Brady Streets, and here I was taken off the truck and searched again, cursed and called all kinds of names in the language of take your hats off, throw up your hands. Even boys of 10. I obeyed. After entering the convention hall, I was met with very courteous treatment because I was well known among the whites. In the meantime, my wife and I were separated, and they took her and my baby to the park, she being sick. I was in a fit of eagerness to find her, so I phoned the man from whom I was employed, and he came and got me released and took me in a truck and went in search of my wife. At the baseball park, I found that my daughter had fallen into an epileptic fit and was sent to a hospital. In a frenzy of despair, my task had just begun, but by the help of the God-sent Red Cross, answering my wants as far as first aid to the body, but no satisfaction of the mind, I found my wife and baby safe at the 5th Street Methodist Church. It was rough. But not only did you have these African-American men defending the community and people of the Red Cross coming to the relief of a lot of these people, there was this great unsung hero, Buck Colebrook B.C. Franklin. He was an African-American lawyer in Tulsa during this time period. He got together with his firm, and after the African American community was largely burned, he and his legal partners actually practiced out of a tent for a period of time. And listen to this, folks. It was on the 13th day of August of 1921 that this firm of lawyers, the first to do so, filed suit in the district court to adjoin and restrain the city fathers from interfering or in any way molesting the colored people in the rebuilding of their homes that had been licked up in the flames of June the 1st, 1921. It will be remembered that the city commissioners had on the 7th day of June 1921 passed and promulgated a fire ordinance that had for its obvious purpose the making of it an impossibility for the people of color to rebuild their homes. To make a long story short, it was Buck Franklin who sued the city to prevent them from taking away these African American lands. And so throughout a number of organizations, the blacks raised money and rebuilt Black Wall Street. In fact, in Scott Ellsworth's book, Death in the Promised Land, this is a picture of Tulsa, of Greenwood section of Tulsa in 1938. Those people rebuilt that city into something even better than they had before. And that's the part of the story that you don't hear. And another word about Buck Franklin. Buck Franklin was the father of this man, the great black historian John Hope Franklin. And that's me and Dr. Franklin at a conference in Toronto in 1999. So you see, and so there's another bit of interesting story about that too, was that one of the survivors of the Tulsa Massacre was a lady, in fact, by the name of Venice Sims. This is her right here. And the night of the Tulsa Massacre, she was supposed to go to her prom at Booker T. Washington High School. Well, of course, with the massacre, that meant that it was impossible. But guess what? Nearly 80 years later, in 2000, the students of Booker T. Washington High School invited her back, and she wore a gown and finally attended her prom. Now, don't get me wrong. People did suffer badly in the Tulsa Massacre. There were many who were killed, many who remained homeless, and many never returned to Tulsa again. But the fact that what you don't often hear is that these people fought back. They had an African-American lawyer that helped them get their land back. They raised money and they built that place back into something just as grand. And a little side note, by the way, a recent generation of Tulsans was so inspired by all this that they took the name of Greenwood, Archer, and Pine and they made it into one of the popular rhythm and blues groups of the late 1970s and early 1980s. I'm talking about Uncle Charlie Wilson and his family, the Gap Band of Tulsa, Oklahoma. So the story of the Tulsa Massacre is not just one of gloom, despair, and agony on me. It's also the story of a people that rose up and fought back and rebuilt. And for those of you who are going through despair today, think of the Tulsa Massacre and how many of them managed to survive and triumph over that, and think of what you could do today. This is Damon Fordham talking about the forgotten heroes of the Tulsa Massacre.